only if we first believe that we can.
This wonderful woman's video is absolutely great. It's about social constructivism. You should go and watch it. I just wanted to pick up on the last thing that she says in the video to make a broader point about the importance of Marx's analysis of history. Even though the definition of social constructivism that she gives is a fascinating one, she doesn't ground her explanation in the material world. Of course, there's only so much time to discuss something in a TikTok video, but while she tells us that a social construction exists, she doesn't tell us why it exists. Why is that important? It's important because if we don't know why society is constructed the way it is, how can we change it? Do we really just have to believe? History is predicated on the material forces of reality. Our existence in the world does not proceed from the mind, it proceeds from matter. The mind is a consequence of matter, not the other way around. Humans have to produce their own world, and it is that process of producing the world that gives rise to how we think and feel about the world. Our society is constructed in the way it is because the way humans produce their own world, in other words, the current mode of production, requires that construction to be that way. In other words, this social construction of parking cars and going to work at certain times and so on is constructed because that's what capitalism, the current mode of production, requires. That social construction is then protected, managed and justified by a system of ideology that also has a material basis. The police, the army, the justice system, the education system, the way that we socialize with each other, and even our family units are all socially constructed structures that reinforce and justify the way that we produce our material world. So if we want to change that social construction, we therefore have to change the way we produce our material world. But as historical materialism shows us, the change in the way we produce our material world is a phenomenon that occurs independently of human belief. Humans don't will that transformation into existence. It happens because the productive forces in crisis produce the process of transformation. And we can see capitalism is perpetually in crisis. Understanding that analysis allows communists to get out of this liberal notion that achieving social transformation just requires us to have a belief or the right idea or a leader who has the right idea, and provides a practical understanding of how societies change and subsequently prepare us to offer leadership on new modes of producing our material world when capitalism finally collapses. And that's why Marx is important.
I used to wear this shirt to my high school all the time. I was a communist.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that this young lad was never actually a communist and never had a very developed and full understanding of communism. And I say that because of the book choices he showed us at the beginning of his video. The Communist Manifesto was a programmatic document written for a political organisation in 1848 when Marx was 29 years old. It's an important document because it's the first time a systematic communist programme for social change was written down, and it also gives a summary of Marx's theory of a materialist conception of history, which he would later go on to talk about a great deal. The text, however, is historically specific, and the programme in it is not necessarily transferable. In 1872, Marx wrote in the preface to the latest edition of the Communist Manifesto, "The practical application of the principles will depend, as the manifesto itself states, everywhere and at all times on the historical conditions for the time being existing, and for that reason no special stress is laid on the revolutionary measures proposed at the end of section 2. That passage would, in many respects, be very differently worded today." The question then is, can we judge what is and is not communist based on a text written in 1848 that even the author of the text said was outdated in his own lifetime? The 1844 manuscripts are even more intriguing and the basis for one of the most divisive debates between contemporary Marxians. Marx started his academic life as a young Hegelian, and that was defined by this German idealism. So when he wrote the 1844 manuscripts, when he was 28, he still had all that energy inside him. What Marx wanted to understand was how and what and why human beings existing in the world produced the world around us in the way that they did. He concluded in the 1844 manuscripts that the proletariat was defined based on its alienation, that the class was essentially the sum of individual humans who had been alienated, not just from the things that they produce and the way they produce them, but from themselves and from each other. But then Marx wrote Das Kapital in 1867 and everything changed. Marx had spent 30 years researching this subject and had what Marxians call his epistemological break. In other words, the way that Marx conceptualized his central ideas just completely changed. He broke from this humanist approach that said that the proletariat is defined by their alienation and began to understand the proletariat as a social phenomenon in relation to the means of production. What this shows is that Marxian communism is not a monolithic idea stuck in the time, but an evolving and developing process of understanding and analysing the world. Wearing an edgy t-shirt to high school and reading the top 2 choices from your first year sociology reading list does not make you a communist. It's not what I'm saying, but it's an interesting thing to think about. What I was getting at is that Marx's ideas and communism as an idea are living ideas and can be used to understand how the world is and how it's adapted. The problem with revisionists of all kinds is that they haven't adapted. They claim Marx for themselves, but they very much remain wedded to the past and they won't let go of certain ideas. Marx's intellectual work was mostly focused on understanding and critiquing capitalism, developing a method for understanding reality. And although he was very politically active, he founded the Communist League and was heavily involved in the First International. His writings on strategy and tactics are very limited. After Marx had died and the Second International was formed, people who liked Marx's ideas decided to formalise those ideas into an ideology, which they called Marxism. The question then is whether that formal ideology is true to the critique and methodology of Marx. And that's the debate, right? Every tendency in Marxism will say they are the rightful heirs to Marx's ideas. Personally, I think it's important that we recognise Marx wasn't trying to formalise his ideas. He didn't think his views were beyond criticism or alteration. He routinely criticised his own ideas. He routinely changed and updated his views. What didn't change throughout his life was his understanding that capitalism is fundamentally and profoundly at odds with the majority of human beings being free and happy, and that people who can change the world are those people who make everything, whether that's bread or buildings. Why? Because we're the ones who are prevented from truly being free, and we're the ones who have the most to gain. His popular quote, "Workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains," remains as incisive and as real as it did in 1848. In terms of books to read, if it's Marxian communism that you're wanting to learn more about and you're feeling brave, you could try Value, Price and Profit. There's a chapter in the German ideology called Idealism and Materialism, and you could even give the first chapter of Capital a go. If those seem quite daunting, you could read this book. It's called The Housing Monster. It's partly illustrated and it uses the building of a house to help you understand Marx's critique of capitalism. Antagonistic comments like this demonstrate to me that people don't really understand Marx's project. Viewpoint magazine have published an article. It's called Marx, Marxism and Marxisms, Ways of Reading Marx's Theory. I've put the PDF in the Communism for Beginners section of the link in my bio. I suggest that this person should go and read that, and anybody who wants to understand different ways of reading Marx's theory should go and read it as well. What we need to remember is that Marx's project wasn't complete. If Marx hadn't died in 1881, he wouldn't have just stopped writing at that point and never changed or thought about his ideas ever again. Marx thought about and changed his ideas a lot throughout his life, and the idea that Marxism is this monolithic, unmovable thing is just not true. I know some Marxists have done that, and this is a legacy of the Second International, where after Marx had died, people took Marx's ideas and they formalized them into an ideological worldview. The problem with that orthodox reading of Marx is that it doesn't take into account the fact that Marx's project wasn't complete, and also that much of the work that Marx had written wasn't published until after they'd formalized it. For example, Grundrisse wasn't published until 1953. So in my view, you can't really formalize a set of ideas if you don't have a full picture of a project that's not even completed. Putting that aside, the point I'm trying to make is that Marx's ideas are not above criticism. There shouldn't be sacred cows in Marx's ideas. Everything should be up for discussion at all times. That's not because I don't have faith in Marx's ideas, but because if we really want to investigate reality and we really want to challenge reality, then we have to be prepared to criticize everything. Marx himself said, I am referring to ruthless criticism of all that exists, ruthless both in the sense of not being afraid of the results it arrives at, and in the sense of being just as little afraid of the conflict it brings with the powers that be. So I'm not afraid of criticism. I want criticism. Criticism creates debate, and debate is progress. Baum-Bevec, this guy that is quoted here, critiqued the labour theory of value, which is an interesting thing because currently there are German Marxist theorists who are also criticising the labour theory of value. In fact, they're making so much criticism that they're essentially reconstructing Marxism. I would suggest you go and read about them. There's an exciting new project set up by some Marx scholars in America to publish a manuscript written by Marx for the very first time in English. This manuscript is called the Reworking Manuscript. It was written between 1871 and 1872 by Marx, and it contains the theoretical basis for many of the revisions that Marx made to Capital One. In the manuscript, Marx is making commentary and notes about Capital One in preparation for Capital Two. Why this is exciting is because for people who study Marx, this is the very first time you'll be able to read in English Marx, reading Marx, commenting on Marx. For those of us that don't study Marx scholarly, then it may even influence our understandings of Capital and what Marx was trying to get at. Much of what Marx wrote has never actually been translated into English or published, so it's really exciting that we'll be able to get to read this for the very first time. The organisers for this project have set up a GoFundMe campaign. If you want to be part of essentially making history and you want to get this thing published into English, then click on the link in my bio, check out the projects, and if you've got a bit of spare cash, get donating. Just an FYI, I'm not part of this project. I don't know the people who are doing it. I just think it's a really cool project. So I'm sharing it with you guys in the hope that you'll be able to support it.
Give the surplus to the laborers or the people who produce the chairs.
Marx's project wasn't about taking surplus from one group of people and giving it to another group of people. It was about abolishing the surplus altogether. Capitalist and proletarian are not fixed, permanent categories. They're social relationships, and Marx's whole project was about abolishing those social relationships. As with all social democrats and liberals, this person makes many errors when talking about social change, but I want to talk about three of the most fundamental errors that she seems to make. Now, I've watched a lot of this woman's videos, and they are... You see, liberals and social democrats, their whole problem that they're trying to solve is completely different to the problem that communists and socialists are trying to solve. For them, all they need to do is solve the problem of redistributing wealth. For communists and socialists, redistribution of wealth isn't actually addressing the fundamental problem of exploitation. But anyway, I think we need to cut some people some slack, right? Because capitalist ideology is totalizing and penetrative, and, you know, the interpolating effects of capitalist ideology, of ideological and repressive state apparatuses. They are designed specifically to misinform and misdirect and mystify communist ideas. And even communists and socialists and social democrats who believe these ideas are not immune from these effects. That said, it's important to criticize when these errors have been made, and that's what I'm going to do, or try to do. The first error is describing communism as an ideology. It's not an ideology. I've said this before. It's a social relationship. Communism is describing a social relationship. Marx's project wasn't about trying to get everybody to agree with the same idea. It was about showing how the proletariat, the working class, could liberate themselves from capitalism. So in that sense, communism is describing a way of producing the world around us. Now, we know that human beings produce the world around us because we participate in our jobs every single day. We produce everything that we need. So communism is describing a form of producing the world around us, or in other words, it's describing a form of human existence. And actually, that form of existence is quite natural. We see examples of it in primitive societies, and we can see examples of it on very micro levels in society today under capitalism. If you look at children at play, that is an example of communism. If you look at friendship groups, normal standard friendship groups, deciding how to do things, when to do things, what things need to be done, that's a form of communism. A household, a family house who have certain tasks and responsibilities, that is a form of communism. The second error she makes is falling into the trap of idealism. And I don't mean the notion of having an ideal, I mean philosophical idealism. So for her, she understands human history or social change as being about the internal conflict of ideas, of thoughts, that if we can change our ideas, if we can fight against the ideas that we have in our head, we'll be able to change the world. Marx's early life and career as a philosopher was dedicated to overturning this idea, this idealistic conception of reality, and showing very clearly and very successfully how it wasn't about the internal conflict of ideas, but it was about the material conflicts between categories, classes of human beings struggling to produce the world around them. So social change isn't about individual human ideas, it's about material social conflict. The third, and I think most crucial error that she makes, is she falls into the trap of humanism. Now, I don't mean humanism in the sense of human beings being nice to one another. I mean philosophical humanism. So for her, human beings are this unique human category who have these unique human powers. So for her, it is these human beings with these human thoughts and this uniquely human power that need to be convinced of an idea before they will put that human power into action to change the world. This is false. It is not human beings with their human power, but proletarians with their class power. The fight against capitalism is obviously a human one in the sense that it's human beings that do the fighting. But the solution isn't an individual human one. It's a social one. You see, class is a social category founded on material things. My interest as a worker is not the same as the interests of Elon Musk. And even if Elon Musk suddenly changed his ideas, the material forces that give rise to these social categories wouldn't just disappear. You see, the fundamental problem with liberals and social democrats is they cannot conceive of a world in which human beings individually change their minds about capitalism. So they seek out compromises. And this is the problem with social democrats and their proposals for social democracy. Because they believe in this idealistic, humanistic conception of reality, they dislike capitalism, but they simply cannot conceive of a world in which everybody suddenly changes their mind. But for those who have understood Marx and who are proletariat, it is irrelevant whether every single human on the planet suddenly decides that they want communism. You see, capitalism isn't going to survive indefinitely.
even under social democracy. Its internal contradictions, its internal material contradictions will lead to crisis and class struggle. The response to that isn't one that all humans can face together. It's one that the proletariat has to face. Black, white, brown, Latino, men, women, trans, queer, cis, and everything in between. It's about how they respond and intervene in class struggle and how they rebuild the world that capitalism leaves behind. And we don't need to go out there and convince people. When crisis happens, we know that the proletariat move into action. They don't need to believe in communism. They simply need to react as the proletariat against the crises created by capitalism. And as we know from history, they do that irrespective of what communists think or do. Those who wish to really transform our society must remember something, and it's really important. And I'm going to quote from who I think is a brilliant Marxist writer. He's a friend and a comrade. His name is Sam Mercer, and he says this: "Class power is not dependent on the consciousness of human individuals of their exploitation, but of the social position of the class in relation to this exploitation and the strategies it employs to counteract it. The consciousness of human beings obviously has a role to play, but it is not the determining factor of class power. We are not dependent on humanist nor economist schemas. We are dependent upon an open-ended materialism which locates the motor of history in the class struggle." If your life is chaotic and you don't think you're living up to your parents' expectations, just remember what the Prussian police spy report said about a 34-year-old Karl Marx. In private life, he is an extremely disorderly, cynical human being and a bad host. He leads the existence of a bohemian intellectual. Washing, grooming and changing his linen are things he does rarely, and he likes to get drunk. He is often idle for days on end, but will then work day and night with tireless endurance when he has a great deal of work to do. He has no fixed times for going to sleep and waking up. He often stays up all night and then lies down fully clothed on the sofa at midday and sleeps until evening, untroubled by the comings and goings of the whole world. Written by Karl Marx in 1879 to the French communist Jules Guide has recently been unearthed and translated from French into English for the very first time. In the letter, Marx affirms his belief in the need for revolutionary organisation, but he also reaffirms his belief in the necessity for internationalism, in his necessity for international revolution. What's significant about that, I think, is that this letter was written 4 years before Marx died. So this is evidence, this is proof that Marx believed in the necessity of internationalism right up to the end of his life. What is particularly remarkable about this letter is that it appears to show a change in Marx's analysis. Previously, Marx had believed that revolution was going to happen in the big industrial countries, in countries like Great Britain. But this letter seems to confirm that he changed his analysis by the end of his life and now believed that revolution was going to happen in the East, particularly in Russia, which is precisely what happened. And I think this just goes to show the level of Marx's analytical prowess. It just goes to show how incisive Marx was in understanding what was going on in the world. That he was able to predict 40 years before it happened the Russian Revolution is quite significant, I think. This has been a project of the Communist Workers' Organisation, which is the UK section of the International Communist Tendency. They have the translation and an article up on their website at leftcom.org. Go and check it out, it's really fascinating.